The Kremlin's telephone rang at 3:17 a.m. on May 10, 1945. Stalin picked it up, listened for less than a minute, and gave the order that reshaped the century. Zhukov does not stop. Zhukov advances. The Red Army, poised along the Elbe, crossed into American and British sectors before dawn. The war that had ended in our world became something far more terrible. If you're enjoying this dark history, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment which alternate timeline you want us to explore next. First contact came near Genthin. American reconnaissance watched in disbelief as Soviet T-34s rumbled past the demarcation line. A young lieutenant radioed, "Sir, the Russians are still coming. They're not stopping." No declaration of war, no ultimatum. Only tank treads on cobblestones and the stunned silence of an Allied command planning demobilization. Within 48 hours, the Red Army seized Leipzig, Erfurt, and western Berlin. Eisenhower, awakened by a frantic call, faced an impossible choice. His forces were scattered, low on fuel, psychologically unprepared. Men who survived Normandy and the Ardennes dreamed of home. Now they were asked to fight their recent allies. The first American counterattack at Magdeburg was a disaster. Shermans were outmatched by Soviet IS-2 heavies. But the real nightmare was logistics. The Red Army had spent 4 years learning to supply across devastated terrain. The Western Allies had spent 4 years learning to supply armies always moving forward. When the front stalled, the Americans ran out of shells first. Truman convened the Joint Chiefs on May 14th. The situation was stark. Soviet numerical superiority, American atomic bombs, and no plan for this. The bomb existed in only 2 functional devices, but Truman understood something Stalin did not. The bomb was not just a weapon, it was the last argument. On May 19th, a B-29 took off from southern England. Its target was a Soviet staging area outside Magdeburg. The bomb detonated at 2,000 feet. In a flash brighter than any sun, the Red Army's forward divisions ceased to exist. The shockwave was heard in Berlin. Fallout drifted east. Stalin's response was fury. He ordered his remaining forces to dig in from the Baltic to the Alps and began a crash program to build his own atomic weapon. The Soviet nuclear project, which in our timeline would test its first bomb in 1949, became the single priority of the state. Thousands of captured German scientists were put to work. Some had been destined for the Manhattan Project. Now they served the Kremlin. The war stabilized into a frozen front, a strange peace stretching from Lübeck to Trieste. Europe was divided not by an iron curtain, but by a radioactive scar. The western half rebuilt under the Marshall Plan. The eastern half was stripped of industry and shipped to the Urals. Warsaw, Prague, Budapest became empty shells. In 1947, the Soviet Union tested its first atomic device. The world now had 2 nuclear powers sharing a border in the heart of Germany. The balance of terror arrived 30 years early, far more unstable. No missile silos or submarine fleets, only bombers on constant alert and forward airbases minutes from their targets. The first atomic crisis came in 1949, when Soviet forces attempted to seize the Kiel Canal. The Americans responded with a tactical nuclear strike against a tank column. For 72 hours, the world held its breath. The exchange remained limited, but the precedent was set. Nuclear weapons were not a last resort, they were a tactical option. Here our world diverges most sharply. In our timeline, the Cold War was a conflict of proxy wars and ideological competition. In this timeline, it was a war of direct confrontation, fought with the most terrible weapons ever devised, on a continent already reduced to rubble. The Europe that emerged was not integrated economies and open borders. It was a fortress, dotted with craters, divided by walls from the North Sea to the Adriatic. The cultural consequences were profound. The United States became a permanently mobilized garrison state. The GI Bill created educated veterans, but of a war that never ended. Optimism curdled into grim, defensive patriotism. The Soviet Union was defined by sacrifice and suspicion. The Great Purges had been a prelude. Now the state demanded total allegiance, because the alternative was annihilation. The Russian soul, once expressed in Tolstoy and Tchaikovsky, was channeled entirely into war material. The world that could have been is a mirror held to our own. In our timeline, the Cold War was a long twilight struggle. In this timeline, it was a hot war from the start, fought with fire and fallout. The difference is not in the outcome, but in the cost. Both timelines ended with a divided Europe, but one left the continent poisoned, scarred, and silent. The question that lingers is not whether Stalin would have given the order. It is whether any of us, faced with the same power and fear, would have done differently. The answer is written in the ruins of a world that never was, and in the fragile peace of the one we still have. The silence after that first atomic exchange never lifted. It settled into bones like fallout into soil. Children born in the late 1940s grew up knowing air raid sirens the way their parents knew church bells. School drills taught them to crouch under desks, as if that could shield them from the light that erased cities. By 1952, both sides had hydrogen bombs, weapons measured in megatons, capable of turning mountain ranges into glass. Forward bases in Germany became the most heavily fortified positions in history, ringed with minefields and concrete bunkers. The soldiers knew they were hostages. If war began again, they would be the first to die, buying perhaps 20 minutes of warning. Yet from this frozen horror emerged a strange cooperation. American and Soviet patrols, separated by barbed wire, recognized each other as fellow prisoners. They traded cigarettes through the wire. They learnt each other's names. They understood that the men on the other side were not enemies. They were mirrors. The first prisoner exchange in 1955 was quiet, at a checkpoint near the ruins of Kassel. American pilots shot down during the 1949 crisis were traded for Soviet intelligence officers. The men who walked across that no man's land did not salute. They simply looked at each other, then walked home to countries as foreign as the enemy they had faced. By 1960, the world had settled into a rhythm of crisis and détente, each cycle leaving participants more exhausted and afraid. The arms race consumed everything. The Soviet Union poured its entire national product into weapons, leaving its people on black bread and potatoes. The United States built a military-industrial complex employing 1 in 5 workers. The dream of a peaceful post-war world died in the flash over Magdeburg. What replaced it was a waking nightmare sustained by mutual terror. The art of this timeline reflected its origins. No abstract expressionism, no celebration of freedom, only grim, functional realism depicting soldiers, factories, hollow faces of children. The novels were about survival, not transcendence. The music was martial or silent, yet the world endured. It endured because the alternative was unthinkable, and because the men who held the keys were, at the last moment, afraid to use them. In 1967, a Soviet radar operator named Alexei Petrov saw a blip indicating an American missile launch. He chose to believe it was a malfunction. It was. The world continued to spin. The lesson is not that history is determined by great men or powers. It is that history is determined by moments, the weight of a finger on a trigger, the decision of a single man to wait 1 more second. The world that could have been is a world of such moments, frozen in amber, waiting for someone to choose differently. The ruins of Genthin still stand. The cobblestones are cracked and overgrown. Children play there, not knowing why the ground glows faintly at night. They do not know they play on the grave of a world that could have been. They only know the sky is quiet and the tanks have stopped coming.